Dear friends in sport integrity, I'm delighted to welcome you to the SIGA 2023 Anti-Corruption Week, directly from Atlanta, Georgia, United States, where the United Nations celebrates the 20th anniversary of its Convention Against Corruption. What a memorable occasion. What a momentous gathering we have here with nations from all over the world and sports organizations and champions on the fight against corruption, money laundering, tax evasion, and so many other detrimental threats to sport. Over the next few days, we will bring to you a series of thought leadership events and initiatives with one fundamental goal: to promote the implementation of the highest integrity standards across sport, to usher sport and the wider industry into a new era, free from corruption, money laundering, criminal infiltration, and other threats that stain its image, undermine its role, and tarnish its reputation and credibility. This will include, as far as SIGA is concerned, the inaugural meeting of the recently created SIGA Permanent Committee on Anti-Corruption in Sport, led by the co-chair of the G20 Anti-Corruption Working Group and independent chair of SIGA, Giovanni Tartaglia Polcini, and the active participation in the conference of the states parties of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, that, as I said, begins precisely tomorrow here in Atlanta. Another milestone within the framework of this United Nations conference will be the organization of a high-level side event on integrity and corruption in sport, which we will organize in partnership with our partners and committed supporters, the International Anti-Corruption Academy, also known as IACA. But that's not all. Over the next 2 days, we will also participate on the Private Sector Forum. This is a 2-day special event organized by the United Nations Offices on Drugs and Crime, UNODC, and the United Nations Global Compact that will take place also here in Atlanta. Highlight must also go to the launch of the 4th issue of the Sport Integrity Journal, this time dedicated to the SIGA Universal Standards on Sport Integrity and the SIGA Independent Rating and Verification System, commonly known as SIRS. And all this, with much more, is what this Anti-Corruption Week has reserved for you. We cordially invite you to be part, to take your place, and raise your voice, share your inputs, your views, and your suggestions on how we can further advance in propelling this culture of integrity across the sporting landscape. But this year, the SIGA Anti-Corruption Week does not coincide solely with International Anti-Corruption Day, which is celebrated precisely today, the 9th of December. It also coincides with the 20th anniversary of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, which I have already alluded. The significance of this convention clearly cannot be underestimated. This convention is the world's first and only legal binding universal anti-corruption instrument. Over the past 2 decades, UNCAC has played a pivotal role in uniting countries against corruption and fostering effective cooperation between governments, civil society, and the private sector. This convention has also helped to raise awareness of the devastating impact of corruption on societies and economies around the world, and has provided a framework for action to prevent and combat this scourge. Notwithstanding that, much work, but really much work remains to be done to ensure that these provisions are fully implemented and enforced. Regrettably, this must be said. There is still a considerable lack of political will to tackle the problem. Indeed, many governments pay lip service to the fight against corruption, but they fail to take concrete action to address the issue. This is often due to the fact that corrupt practices are deeply entrenched in many societies and many sectors, and those who benefit from corruption have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. Another reason why the United Nations Convention on Anti-Corruption is not succeeding to the full extent that it should is the lack of integrity, transparency, and accountability in many institutions and business sectors. Corruption, as we know, thrives in environments. It thrives in environments where there is poor governance, poor regulation, and lack of transparency, accountability, and independent scrutiny. Moreover, there is a general lack of education and awareness about the dangers of corruption. Many people and organizations still do not understand the extreme adverse impact that corruption has on society, and they are certainly not aware of the steps they can take to prevent it. It might seem a paradox, it might seem unbelievable, but that is regrettably the reality. Another major challenge facing international community is the need to strengthen the capacity of developing countries to prevent and combat corruption effectively. This obviously requires not only financial resources, but also technical assistance, capacity building programs to help those countries build the necessary institutions and systems to prevent and detect corruption. Finally, as technology continues to evolve in this digital age, new forms of corruption are emerging. And it is essential to develop new tools, new strategies, and new solutions to combat and eradicate these threats. The 20th anniversary of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption represents, therefore, an important milestone, a milestone in the fight against corruption. It provides also an opportunity to reflect on the progress that has been made and to renew our commitment to working together to prevent and combat corruption in all its forms and in all sectors. But against this background, there is one inexorable question that must be answered. The question is, are we winning the fight against corruption or not? The answer, regrettably, is no. We are not winning the fight against corruption. Far from it. Corruption is omnipresent in every aspect of our society, government system, and global business. No country, no sector, and no human activity is immune to it. And sport, self-evidently, is not an exception. I even dare to say that as far as sport is concerned, the situation could not be more alarming. And I'm measuring my words with full knowledge of the weight they carry. The situation is daunting. Sport is facing an exponential corruption crisis on a global scale. We see new cases emerging from all around the world on a daily basis. The vulnerability of sport to corruption and the growing number of other threats, like money laundering, tax evasion, criminal infiltration, trafficking and abuse of young athletes, just to mention a few, is greater than ever. These threats, make no mistake about it, are complex, sophisticated, and as SIGA has recurrently denounced, increasingly involve transnational organized crime. Club ownership, commercialization of audiovisual rights, sponsorship deals, major sports events, and players' transfers, these are some of the most vulnerable areas of sport. The question is, and certainly you are raising it, how did we get here? How did sport, which was supposed to be the ultimate example of fairness, a beacon of integrity, and a force for good, has reached this stage? The response, ladies and gentlemen, can be found precisely in the conclusions of the SIGA 2020 World Congress on Anti-Corruption and Global Leadership that we organized in February 2020. And they are more timely than ever. First, whilst positive strides have been made in recent years, that is true, sport has been victim of lack of global leadership and a permissive environment. A permissive environment fueled by poor regulation, poor governance, lack of independent scrutiny, and a certain lax attitude by many sports organizations, governments, and other key stakeholders. The second conclusion is that in addition to the lack of global leadership, the lack of inclusive dialogue, result-driven cooperation, and coordinated global action still persists. On the other hand, public investment in the integrity of sport remains insufficient and has actually decreased over the past several years, not just during the pandemic. Law enforcement and judicial systems also continue facing long-standing lack of human, technical, and financial resources. It's not lack of interest, it's lack of resources, it's lack of know-how, it's lack of specific expertise on sport-related criminality, on how criminal syndicates operate at global level. This has also been a deterrent, this has also been an obstacle, and it must be said. Coupled with the traditional and misconceived understanding that sport-related crimes are less socially damaging than others, all this explains why, in general, the fight against corruption in sport is not regarded as a top priority by law enforcement and governments, because that is the truth. Furthermore, I dare to add, there is a persistent lack of structured dialogue and cooperation amongst law enforcement agencies and the lack of appropriate cooperation platform. In 2020, when we met in Italy under the auspices of the honorary chairman of SIGA, the Judge Franco Frattini, I brought together two law enforcement agencies for the first time ever. And I could not be more surprised that this was taking place for the first time. So believe me, when I also say that national and international legislation are in need of a robust and urgent reform. Corruption and other types of crime, such as influence trafficking, are still not qualified as criminal offenses in a number of countries in the world, which leave those crimes unpunished in accordance with the Latin principle, nulla crimen sine lege. This, ladies and gentlemen, is fundamentally wrong, and we must change. Against this background, question is, how can sport safeguard its own integrity? What role can sports entities, governments, international organizations, global business and civil society play? And where do we start? Where do we start? Let me tell you, in my view, what needs to be done. All sports organizations must assume accountability for their own affairs and lead by example. Grandiloquent proclamations, territorial feelings, and self-assessment exercises are completely futile. Actions, ladies and gentlemen, actions speak louder than words, and only results matter. Accordingly, if sport wants to be regarded as a fit for purpose and credible sector, sports representative structures, be they international and national federations, Olympic committees, clubs, leagues, and other key stakeholders, they must give a step forward, implement the SIGA Universal Standards on Sport Integrity, and go through the SIGA Independent Rating and Verification System. Secondly, global sponsors, broadcasters, and other commercial partners must do their job too. They are not mere bystanders. They are key stakeholders. They invest not only their money in sport, but also their own reputation and credibility. And they are accountable to their consumers and their shareholders. They are accountable to global society. So they too must carry and exert the indeclinable responsibility of shouldering with SIGA and use their power to press for integrity in sport. We will be vigilant about that. In third place, corruption and other neighboring crimes in sport must be criminalized by all states parties of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. To this end, SIGA will set up a multi-stakeholder action force, develop global legal analysis to ascertain which countries criminalize corruption in sport and which do not. And this analysis, mark my words, will be made public in the interest of transparency and accountability. In order to overcome the general deficit of knowledge, expertise, and know-how on prevention and fight against corruption in sport amongst the law enforcement and the judicial system, as well as governments and sporting organizations, SIGA will provide them with training, education, and capacity building services. Fifth, SIGA will encourage governments to increase investments in the promotion and protection of the integrity of sport. And again, we will make these data public so that the public can see who is investing in the integrity of sport and who is just paying lip service and window dressing. In the response to the increased lack of means and resources faced by many sports organizations, SIGA will promote the creation of a global sport integrity fund. This is a long-standing commitment of SIGA, whose implementation was affected by the global pandemic. Now that the pandemic seems to be on our back, we will set up a multi-stakeholder task force with the aim of further developing this concept and take the necessary action. Our view is simple. Our view is that amongst other potential sources of revenue, the Sport Integrity Fund may encompass a percentage of revenues generated by the commercial exploitation of broadcasting rights, sponsorship deals, and sports betting. A percentage of the pecuniary sanction determined by criminal courts on sport-related cases, or resulting from the apprehension of illicit funds and assets to criminal organizations or individuals involved in sports-related criminal cases, must also revert to sport to sustain sport integrity-related activities, training, education, and capacity building. And this, of course, also includes donations and other sources. So, with this in mind, ladies and gentlemen, I want to be clear. These are clear commitments that I'm making on behalf of SIGA at the outset of this anti-corruption week. I believe that corruption is not inevitable. I believe that corruption can be prevented and reduced. I believe it can be exposed and prosecuted. It can be challenged and changed. But what we cannot afford is to waste more time, because corruption is already costing us too much. We have now the responsibility and the opportunity to make a difference. We have the tools and the mechanisms. We have the will and the commitment. So let us make of this SIGA Anti-Corruption Week a true catalyst for action. Let us make of this fantastic gathering of like-minded organizations and individuals, of champions of sport integrity, not just a declaration of intent, but a roadmap for change. We count on you. You know we can count on us. I wish you a fruitful, positive, constructive, stimulating SIGA Anti-Corruption Week. And please participate in all the activities and lend your voice to ours. Join us at the forefront of this fight for integrity in sport. Thank you very much.